Earl, I can't hear you. Commercial break, stay tuned. Okay. What's going on today? This is crazy.
All right. Welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram. The last uh, podcast that I had an opportunity to do with Miss Joyce Mallory, we began to talk a little bit about some of the issues that are facing public schools and especially Milwaukee public schools that have been going on for a myriad of years. And as people talk about it today, they talk as if this is an issue that is new. But I want to do a little background of my guest before we get into our conversation. As a former MPS school board director, Ms. Joyce Mallory was disappointed to learn that the day-to-day financial operations of Milwaukee Public Schools were in disarray. However, the most alarming discovery was the failure of both the former superintendent and the board of school directors to fulfill their fiduciary duties to Milwaukee's taxpayers. During her tenure as an MPS board director, the organizational structure of a separate secretary, business manager who held a Department of Public Instruction license and reported to the Board of School Directors, provided the safeguards and internal controls that prevented the lack of compliance and financial mismanagement. This structure remained in place for 80 years until it was changed by the legislature in 1991. The success of the previous structure demands that the board of directors, MPS administrator, mayor, Department of Public Instruction, governor, legislature, and other community partners work together and agree to reforms that will restore the financial integrity of Milwaukee Public Schools financial system. It is with that backdrop that I welcome back just a warrior and just a lifelong fighter for education uh, across the nation, but especially in the city of Milwaukee, Miss Joyce Mallory. Good morning to you, my friend. It's good to talk to you again.
Yes, thank you for having me, Earl. It's nice to be able to have a forum where you can share a little wisdom, a little institutional knowledge that many may think isn't relevant to today, but having good financial systems, having best practices is always, it never goes out of style and is always necessary.
Can you explain to me or to us why in 1991 the legislature decided to change what had been a successful structure for over 80 years?
I don't think it got much attention. Uh, and actually I was on the board and I was against that change. It was done fairly quietly when we had a change in leadership, uh, and the change in leadership thought that having all of the power under the superintendent was was prudent in terms of their vision of what how the district should operate. And so it was also at a time when we didn't have when the legislature was a little more punitive than supportive
Right.
to the district. So, they felt, well, I should have all of the control. But the having a secretary business manager didn't mean that that person didn't interact and didn't work collaboratively with the superintendent. It was just the opposite. They both worked together to develop the budget. The superintendent did the education, all of the departments that reported to him. It was his responsibility to develop that budget and work collaboratively with the secretary business manager, who had responsibilities because some of the departments uh, uh, reported directly to him. So together they were able to look at what was the finance, what was the revenue we were going to be receiving across all of our revenue lines, look at what were the needs, where were some of the needs. We always looked at capital needs. We looked at day-to-day operations. We had the operational costs from year to year increase. So you take all of that into consideration, and with the board's guidance, the budget committee always gave set priorities and gave direction in terms of this is how much taxpayers should be taxed. We shouldn't go and just get everything somebody wants. We have to be prudent because we know the burden was already high on taxpayers. So you wanted to be as prudent as possible and leverage as much as you could from the state. And so we worked always hard to our lobbyists and governmental affairs staff was always in Madison making the case on behalf of MPS about the needs of our students, about the fact that operational costs were more. So that was how we had operated up until then. Uh, it, I will say this: that system worked. It could have also worked with a single with the change that the legislature made, and it did work for a long time under superintendents who understood that you needed to be physically responsible. I think it all started to unravel later on when you had board changes and people who didn't know that they were responsible for all of the fiduciary responsibilities of the district. So, as long as you had a superintendent who understood uh, his or her responsibilities, you didn't have the problem. The problem came about when you had I think board members who didn't understand their role, who didn't ask the right questions, and didn't get the right information.
Joyce, before we get into the restructuring MPS financial management functions that you have so eloquently put in place or talked about, um, you know, we look at what has transpired over the last decade or more, and we've seen the outcome of what transpired with those changes. You know, I heard constantly over the last decade or more that school board members aren't paid commensurate with the responsibilities that they are entrusted with. And so it's harder to get people, who I hate to use the verbiage qualified, but listen, as I look at the technical aspects of this budget and the way it works, you really need to have somebody who understands the inner workings and the financial complexities of a district that now is 1.3 or 1.4 billion dollars. You can't just have somebody whose intentions are good. You need to have somebody with some skill sets. Your thoughts about whether or not school board members should be paid commensurate with what we're expecting of them.
I laugh at that because I served 10 years and my salary was, I think it got up to $5,000 in the last time I ran. So
Right.
I did all of that work on $3,000 a year. That was the salary. The school board, if you go back and look at the structure and when it was created, was never designed to be a full-time a policy making position. It was citizens who wanted to make sure that policy was developed, because the role of the board really is to set a strategic direction and policy. You have administrators and staff who have the subject matter expertise to do the work. And when you know your responsibility as a board member and and if you educate yourself, part of your responsibility as a board member is to sit down with those subject matter experts in both the business office or the financial office or the comptroller, whoever that person is, and sit down and ask the tough questions, have them go through what is your responsibility. But more importantly, the board should have a really rigorous orientation process so that when you're new, you know what you're supposed to do. You are able to read a financial statement. You're able to understand the budget. You understand state policy and understand your role in all of that. I don't think it requires being a full-time job. We don't need additional expenses. What we need is people who are courageous enough to ask the right questions and do the right thing.
Well, Joyce, I've seen, on television many times and over the internet where school board meetings go into to 3 o'clock in the morning,
Mhm.
and so that's a hard thing for me so to think about that, and so there are people who are sitting in those seats who may not be able to articulate the things that you're talking about. And so they were some of them were recruited to run. It was not something that they had in their hearts and in their spirits. And I don't mean anything negative, but if you have to have that in your gut, um, that you are there and you are there to make the necessary changes, because I don't know if there's any role more important, Joyce, than a school board member. We
Mhm.
can talk about state senators and and other things and all the people and those kind of things. But I think when you're a school board member, you kind of got the future in your hands.
Well, you do, but you also have you have support. I always had a good relationship with the superintendent. If I had questions, I'd call him. They would meet. We would meet when I was board president for a year. We met to set the agenda for board meetings so we could discuss what was going to be on the agenda. We could discuss those thorny issues that we knew we might face, and we'd get pushed back from our parents and as well as the staff. And so we could all discuss what some of those tough issues were, what should be our positions on those, and the other is to sit and listen. You also have to listen to what parents and others say, and be willing to take some of the harshness that they throw at you and still be able to perform and do your job and be respectful and require that they too be respectful back to you. I chaired the budget committee for 5 years, 5 of the 10 years I was on the school board. And you're absolutely right. One time we were there until almost 3 o'clock, debating and going back and forth, amending the budget, doing this. But we all sat there and did it. And I had a full-time job. And I was a single parent for the entire time I was on the board. Um, but we got that budget passed. I went home, slept a few hours, got up, got my son to school, and went to my job. I never complained about that. It was a sacrifice I was willing to make because and my supporters who asked me to run, once I'd said I would run, then I had to take on the responsibility of doing the work. And
Right.
so I educated myself. I made sure I could ask others. It is a give and take, and you take more sometimes than you give, or at least you think you're not giving. But that is part, of course. Now, I think the larger community, as a community, we have a responsibility to really, and I think now to stop and think what really should be the role of a board director, and what should be the qualifications and the of people running, so that we know that they have the skill, the knowledge, and the commitment and dedication. And you don't have to be a subject matter expert in education. What you have to be is, you have to want every child to get an education, and you have to understand the barriers that keep a lot of children, in particular children of color, from being able to get to that outcome. And so it was my job to make sure that policies and practices didn't hinder their aspiration and their parents' aspirations for their children. To support teachers, do they have resources? Do they have what they need? Do they have a capable leader in that building? Do we have teachers who are teaching in their area of certification? I guarantee you, if you did research right now, you will find that a lot of teachers are in classrooms who are teaching out of their area of certification. The goal should be all children should be, teachers should be teaching in their area of certification, and having a license in some other area, but you need a teacher, so they're teaching this class. So I think if we look at how do we make sure moving forward, we are electing, this is a 4-year term, so people get a chance to either do well, or do not so well. And the impact of it, of not doing well, is what we found ourselves in, with losing what, about $50 million in both federal and state support, because of financial mismanagement.
Joyce, how long ago did you put together this restructuring Milwaukee Public Schools financial accountability, transparency, and improving student performance?
I did that when the news came out that MPS was in trouble of losing state financial support, and was and all of the hoopla around the financial crisis, lack of compliance, lack of reporting. So when was that? Back in February.
Yes,
It was this year that I did it,
but this is
or
so
or last year when it came out.
comprehensive, and I will say that it kind of looks like the new superintendent is already working towards some of these initiatives. Let's go with the first bullet point. Restructuring Milwaukee financial management functions of Milwaukee Public Schools. Restore the functions of the previous business manager position to chief of board of governance. Break that language down for those of us who don't understand that.
Well, I was saying, one of the things you need to have in place is policy and structure that doesn't allow something to happen again.
Right.
And so
Of this
superintendents,
magnitude, especially.
yes, especially on the finance side,
Right.
superintendents are going to come and go, and they did during my tenure, they did after my tenure, and they will continue to come and go in the future.
Yeah, normally 3 years or
Well,
less.
yeah.
Right.
So having good policy and good structure that ensures financial integrity, accountability, and compliance is really important. And you don't do that on a whim. You do that by setting internal controls and structures that transcend whoever sits in the superintendent's office and whoever sits in the office of board governance. That the proposal to go back to the functions, it doesn't necessarily have to be a secretary business manager. There is the person who reports, the other staff person who reports to the board is the chief of board governance, and that is the compliance with board policies and procedures and other things that go on in that office has drastically changed from when it was a secretary business manager. If there isn't going to be restoration of a secretary business manager, then the structures and the accountability that needs to be in place to make sure that MPS doesn't find itself out of compliance, that it doesn't lose another federal program like Head Start, then the superintendent has to be held accountable for making sure the recommendations, and I'll switch over to the recommendations that the report, the consultant's report that was done that the governor authorized and was done, then the superintendent, the board needs to hold the superintendent accountable for making sure those recommendations are implemented and are in place.
Compliance reporting for all state and federal programs should be conducted by internal auditors. I guess is what we just got through talking about. With reporting requirements to the Board of School Directors and Superintendent. Budget development functions should be under the Office of Board of Governance. So I've often heard Board of Governance. What is that?
I'm not sure what all functions go under there now. The previously under the secretary business manager structure, the business manager did all of the administrative duties around forecasting revenue, forecasting capital needs, and working collegially with the superintendent to develop the budget. The business manager didn't develop the budget for all of the education functions. The superintendent did that, and the superintendent should continue to do that. What should be done is there should be the business manager understood all of the business functions, all of, for example, food service, the capital needs of facilities. When there should have never been the surprise that lead was in our schools. If you look at when they were built, you should have known lead was in the schools, that asbestos might be in the schools. And so when you're doing a facilities audit, when you're doing all of that to say what are and developing a capital budget so that you keep up with your capital needs and you don't delay maintenance is what's occurred. Every year we had a line item in the budget, capital needs. So I knew every year which schools were going to get painted or what other capital needs that needed to be done. We made sure that we took care of those. It's a collegial responsibility. The superintendent knows the education side. He or she might not always know the other side of what is going on. And so when you have that dual responsibility, you can make the person who's over on the hard side, facilities, buildings, grounds, transportation, all of those things, takes the burden off the superintendent to some extent, so he or she can focus their attention on what is going on educationally and making sure that human resources needs are being met, that a matrix are being met, and all of that. So it really is about working cooperatively together. And the board has to set the strategic direction. They have to give, as I would say, the marching orders to both to say, this is what we want to achieve through this budget and how resources should be allocated.
So, Joyce, the structuring of the budget is done by the superintendent, and then the school board takes a look at that budget, or does the school board craft the budget?
It's the staff. The board doesn't have the go
The
back to your
moxie or the
we don't
understanding, right?
we don't have the subject matter expert.
Right.
We said, for example, when I was on the board, we did things like don't increase the a policy decision we made. Don't increase the tax levy by more than 3%.
Right.
If you have to reduce costs, don't reduce costs. Don't let it negatively impact our students. We want as much financial support behind each student as possible. Cut something, but don't cut the resources and support for children. We want to have capital. They would bring the recommendations for a capital budget. Okay, so here's 100 things that you want to get done. Well, we can't do them all because money is finite. So here's where our priority items should be. They would bring the recommendations. We would review them. A lot of times we agreed, but when we didn't agree, we could say, this is what we would prefer that you do. And so the changes were made to reflect what we thought would be better decisions. But for the most part, we accepted the recommendations of the superintendent and the business manager, and we were able to pass a budget without a lot of grief, for lack of a better word.
A $1.4 billion budget, there's a lot of line items. There's a lot of information, Joyce, that is tedious. And how long would it normally take for school board members, again, who meet not that often, to go over a budget as comprehensive as Milwaukee Public Schools?
Well, a lot of times I would sit down with the secretary of business manager and we'd go line item by line item. But after 3 or 4 years, because I was there 10 years and I chaired the budget, so I had to really read it.
Right.
and I would put my questions there. And what we would do is we'd start off getting the secretary of business manager. We'd have a meeting and he would bring in all of our revenue projections. So first we needed to know how much money we're talking about, right? You can't build a budget unless you know what's your revenue. So we look at all of the revenue sources from the levy, from federal funded programs, how much we anticipated we would get back in state aids across all of our business lines. And then you look at what are going to be your costs. You got fixed costs. You got, transportation went up every year because the price of it went up. Food service. I would say food service during most of my tenure was self-sufficient. We got reimbursed for free and reduced lunch to basically cover the cost of food service. And I want to say something about food service. When I was on the board, Milwaukee Public Schools had one of the best lunch programs in the country. In fact, I went to Washington, D.C. With the head of food service to accept an award on behalf of the district because Milwaukee Public Schools was recognized for the quality of its lunch program.
I remember,
you could walk in any building across this district and smell hamburger buns and hot dog buns and bread being baked because we didn't order bread. The cooks made bread. That was one of the things that we never had. We never had processed bread in the schools during that time. I asked one time, what do you do with some of the subsidy stuff that we get? And they said, oh, yeah, we get a lot of canned sweet potatoes. We just put it in the bread. The kids don't know it.
Well, Joyce, I remember, especially even when I was going to school, the lunches every day were produced at each school,
Yes.
fresh, and they included real. I mean, the stuff that they had that I've seen over the last 5 or so years. There's no wonder kids throw that away. How do we get from where we had these nutritious lunches and vegetables and everything was exactly right to where we got to prior to, I guess, this year they finally made some more changes to really, wax stuff that tastes like wax.
Well, it's amazing to me that nobody on the board ever asked how much plate waste there is. We used to ask that question. Let me tell you, there was a student food service committee. There was a student committee that 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 met regularly and provided feedback and information to the food service director and the staff around recommendations and changes. For example, we implemented when we closed high school campuses and students couldn't go off the grounds to the nearest McDonald's.
Right,
They asked for a salad bar, and because we also to put canteens and vending machines in the schools.
right,
During my tenure, we said no, we're not putting soda machines and potato chips in the building. So the high school students asked for a salad bar, and we implemented a salad bar. But the students committee also, when the staff wanted to add anything to the menu, that committee was the testing ground for anything that got added to the menu back during my tenure. If the students didn't like it, it didn't make the menu. That was the food service director's attitude. She says, if they're not going to eat it, then why should we invest in putting it on the menu? It's only going to be thrown away. So the kinds of actions and things that the food service department did somehow probably went away with Mary, and I can't remember Mary's last name. She was head of food service. It probably went away with her because people wanted to be cost effective. So this process stuff that they're putting in front of young people today doesn't work, and it's never worked, and nobody's ever asked why, which is really disappointing. There is no way that any of those board members would eat that. And I would ask the question, how many of you been in the schools to observe what's going on?
nor with the parents. And I can tell you that it's so critically important lunch and breakfast. Milwaukee Public Schools, for those who don't know, sometimes feeds children breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so sometimes that lunch is probably the best, used to be the best meal that a child would get. Um, that was one thing that I always respected about MPS. Let's go to review and revise all accounting and financial staff positions to reflect they must have subject matter experience and expertise to qualify and hold the positions. And the reason that these things, for people who think that this is a tedious discussion, they need to understand we're talking about Milwaukee Public Schools, and we're talking about a district, as you stated, that was losing all of this money and it has been in the spotlight because it was pretty clear off the rails in accountability.
Yes, I mean, if there had been good internal controls and someone who understands how to do an internal audit and how to make sure that you had a schedule for making sure that review of all programs, especially federal and state funded programs, because their reporting and compliance requirements are very tedious sometimes, and you need someone who understands that. And to not have a person at the head of that department who understands that in hiring staff and holding them accountable to a schedule, making sure that reports are completed on time, and then not having someone at the top in the administrative office, superintendent's office, who is also monitoring and making sure that compliance is being met. Yes, ended up out of compliance and losing money. So again, when you have someone who understands the functions, the duties and responsibilities, and the requirements of a federal grant or a program allocations, then you can hold people accountable. But when people just kind of shift it off, and the other is the lack of good internal technology. The systems, I've seen this in
Pretty
some
absolute.
reporting, that the accounting systems were probably archaic and not up to date and not as efficient as they could be. So again, if the board understood its fiduciary role, somebody should, at the board level, should have been asking, are we in compliance with reporting requirements? That, the president, whoever the president should sometimes take on those responsibilities in their interface with the superintendent, because if there's regularly communications, you don't talk about how to stifle dissent at a board meeting. You talk about what it's going to take to improve educational outcomes for children and how to make sure the district is operating in a fiduciary manner that is appropriate and doesn't cost the district large sums of money.
So how do we get to a point, Joyce, where the school board, which hires the superintendent, that the superintendent somehow had more, it appeared to be, control over what was going on in the district than the school board, who hired the superintendent and more or less kind of turned it all over to the superintendent?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I
But
have a
that's
good
what,
answer.
but that's what took place, right?
The answer is the board didn't understand its responsibilities. The superintendent reports to the board. The board hires the superintendent, and the job description is really clear in terms of, or it should be, what is your responsibility, and then the board understanding its role and responsibilities. The question I would ask, how many times was the previous superintendent evaluated by the board? How did they do strategic planning annually as a board and as a superintendent, so they know what's going on? Did the board get the kind of reports that they needed to make sure? Did they have a schedule of programs that required reporting and compliance so that they could check? They have a finance and budget committee or something similar. The names of the committees have all changed, but that information should have been going to a board committee for review. And if it wasn't coming, then the board should have been asking, why aren't we getting these reports? There's a lot of blame going on, but the board had its head in the sand and didn't ask the right questions and didn't take no for an answer. You don't get to say no to me when you work for me.
Yes.
You get to find
Yes.
an answer for me. I might not like the answer, but you got to bring me an answer.
Let me Restore and develop a system of internal controls previously in place to ensure a high level of checks and balances and best practices are in place to prevent malfeasance.
It doesn't have to be what used to be. What needs to be is a good system of internal controls. And if you have it, it would be there always need to be a firewall somewhere when you're dealing with finances, right?
Yes.
You can't let water flow when it needs to be a firewall.
Well, and especially when it's taxpayers' dollars.
That's exactly right, because you are responsible. All of it is taxpayers' money, whether it's state or federal, it's all tax dollars. And you are responsible for those tax dollars. We don't get donations to run the public schools. So, where are the firewalls in terms of the finance? And so, when you have someone who understands where the firewalls should be, and then hold them accountable for making sure those firewalls are there, and you need a board to understand, are they there, and making sure that, and if you're not sure, then hire someone to go in and do an internal audit to make sure that they are.
You know, that's the part of what transpired, you know, recently with Milwaukee Public Schools that I never understood. You've got the finances to hire the best auditors. And all of those things that internally should have been in place because we wouldn't have gotten to where we were. But because of the breakdowns that went on for so long, it got to the point where people were saying, well, at the root of all of this is we need more money. If you would just give us more money, we'd be able to fix this, but we're not getting enough money. Joyce, what you're pointing out is there was enough money, and I got a good friend of mine who was the president for many years, and he said there's always been more than enough money. Those checks and balances that you're talking about is what was missing.
Yes, and it's, again, I'll say this emphatically. It was the responsibility of the board, who the taxpayers put their trust in, to make sure that they were there. And the board forgets that they are accountable to the taxpayers, not to the teachers union. A lot of them hold sway and listen to what the MTA is saying. You are accountable to Milwaukee taxpayers. That's who foots the bill, majority of the bill for what is going on. And so you have the ultimate responsibility to make sure that the policies and practices that go on and is done at a high level. There's integrity, and that the taxpayers have trust in what you are doing, and what the staff, who's paid very well to do. It's not like if we had the best internal controls and during my time, and people were making a whole lot less money 30 years ago than they're making
Right.
now. Everybody at 52nd and Valete is making way more money than the average citizen in the city of Milwaukee. So I don't want to
Even
hear
in the business,
I'm
even in the
underpaid.
business community, even in the business community.
Yeah, I mean, so that is not an excuse. The excuse is, if you hire people who know how to do, who have subject matter expertise and know how to do the job, and they have a manager who will hold them accountable for doing their job, and you have people at a high level who understand what needs to be done, then you don't end up in this mess.
Um, Compliance reporting for all state and federal programs should be conducted by internal audits. We talked about that. Budget development functions should be under the Office of the Board of Governance. Contract development and compliance should be under the Office of Board Governance. Again, it comes back to board governance, and I don't know if I really understand
It is
what
well,
that role. Who
what the
so
role would be. Well,
who hires board governance? And who are those
the
people? What are those titles?
that is hired by the board. The secretary business manager was hired by the board and reported to the board. The chief of governance is hired by the board and reports to the board. Part of it is that when you separate functions, uh, then you have two people you can hold accountable for some of this. And when you had a secretary business manager, we could hold the secretary business manager for making sure that all of the financials and some of the other functions that I mentioned earlier were done. And he reported monthly to the board on those functions. And so you take some of the responsibility because it's a large when you put everything under the superintendent's head on their head. That's a lot of weight, and so this way you have uh, 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 you have good, and the secretary of business manager and the superintendent worked collegially and well together during my tenure. Afterwards, and when once the policy changed, the legislation changed the structure, then it was all on the superintendent. And long as, and I'll say this again, the board governance, if the board understood its role, even with all of the functions under the superintendent, you could still make that work. But you need somebody on the finance side who has the skill and knowledge. The person who's now the comptroller is a CPA and was the comptroller for the city of Milwaukee. So I have, and I work with her on the Charter School Review Committee. I have a little more confidence in that if she has the right people in the seats, that she can right this ship and make sure it sails correctly in the future. But again, it's the board responsibility to make sure that that happens.
So for
So
tax, oh, go ahead.
so they need to make sure at the committee level that they're asking the right questions, they're getting the right reports, and that if they set a schedule of when compliance reports are supposed to be submitted to the state and federal and wherever else they're supposed to go, then they can keep watch and they can ask the right questions and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
So George, if board of governance, is it under, and are they accountable to the superintendent or to the school board directors?
School board.
Okay, so who hires them?
The initial part of your question, Sir George, at Board of Governance.
The board hires the chief of board governance because that person is reporting to them.
Well, you know, Joyce, we are just about at the end for today, and we've got a lot more to
I don't know if people want to keep hearing all this little
No,
tedious stuff.
let me tell you why it's important. I'm a taxpayer like you
Yes,
are,
yes, I am too.
and most of the people who are listening. And so when we are the ones who actually employ, we're the employers of all of these people.
Mhm.
And so we have a right to know where things go, especially when they keep asking for more and more and more, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the thing it is that this wasn't an issue. It's again, I'll say, who sits in the superintendent's chair. If you have good internal controls and you have someone who sits in the superintendent's chair who understands that they are responsible for making sure that uh, taxpayers' money is prudently managed then you don't have this problem. But when you don't have someone sitting in the seat, then you need to have safeguards in place to make sure this doesn't ever happen again. And so one of the questions that need to be asked of this board is, when are you going to tell us, what are you going to do to implement the recommendations of the consultant that was made by the consultant that the governor
State, yeah, that the state hired.
that the state had done to make sure that this didn't happen again? I haven't heard the board talk about that, and I haven't seen any reporting on the measures that are being taken. So I would push that out there as another question, challenge to this board, is that you need to step up to the plate, put on your big girls, big boys pants, and tell us what you're going to do to make sure that this mess doesn't happen again. And I'm calling it a mess because they made it.
Well, Joyce, we're going to keep this conversation going. We're going to continue to drill down. It's because it's that important, and we have to leave it there for now. But we'll be back again and again and again, because we got to go through all of this, and so for people to know that, it can and should be uh, controlled, and it shouldn't just be free flow. No business can run in a manner that the district has been running, not successful. And yet this one has been allowed to kind of move off its, off the track. And now it's time. And thanks to people like you who have the knowledge and information, and this opportunity that we have, we're gonna keep bringing this information forth
I
because
will,
it's the truth.
Earl, I'd like to say I'm hopeful and optimistic that the new superintendent, I think, has the understanding to tackle some of these tough issues. And
I
so
think she does.
I don't want to people to think that I'm not hopeful. I'm just, based on my experience, what is that we shouldn't have never been in that place, in the place that we found ourselves. And so this superintendent has a lot to unpack and uncover. And I would strongly encourage everyone to give her an opportunity to get her sea legs, and so that she can, and I think she's starting off right by saying reading is important, and I applaud that effort. And I'm hopeful that, this time next year we'll be able to see some improvement, both on the operational and financial side, and we'll begin to see some increase and improvement in student outcomes.
Hey, my friend, thank you very much, and we'll continue this on the other side.
Okay, thank you.
All
Have a
right, that's
good day.
Joyce Mallory.
Mhm.
You've been listening to What's Going On with Earl Ingram.
I'm trying not to talk to